I am incredibly annoyed by the romantic plot of this series because Yan Wuxi is a terrible fucking person and he does not deserve Shen Chao. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is 𝕤𝕚𝕚 and I am a self-proclaimed bookworm who loves Danmei. Danmei has easily become my favorite genre in the last couple of years. It was the one I read most in 2023, and that's very likely going to be the case for 2024 as well. So to kick off the new year, I wanted to do a Danmei focus video where I go over what I've read in my physical collection, what I have yet to read, my recent reads, and what I plan to buy this year. This is the Danmei section of my shelves. I will be reorganizing it for a couple of reasons. I want to separate what I've read from what I haven't read, and in terms of how the volumes are organized, I have them going from right to left at the moment, which isn't really a big deal, but the In the Dark volume spines are meant to be organized from left to right to complete the illustration on all three spines. I'll go ahead and start reorganizing while I talk through what I've read, starting with Heaven Official's Blessing. I read the last volume when it was released last year, and we'll do a brief review of it later in this video. I'm recording this video on the 13th, so we have one more episode left in the second season of the 𝕤𝕚𝕟𝕚. I wish it would just go on forever, but I also understand that animation and the entire production are a lot of hard work, so they take time. If you love watching anime as well, a new show that is currently airing that I'll be watching in its place is Cherry Magic, and that's a fun one. Up next on the shelf is the Scum Villain self-saving system. I was able to fit this one in during the holidays at the end of 2023, and I uploaded a 24-hour reading vlog of me reading just this series. I didn't read the last book in that video, but I'm currently reading it, and I'm about halfway through, so I'll just count the series as read. Then I have the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. Funny story here is that I haven't read the entire novel for this series, although I'm pretty familiar with other adaptations and the story in general. I was planning to read it last year, but I did a stupid thing where when I started reading the second volume, I also rewatched all of the 𝕤𝕚𝕟, and for at least the first two books, the 𝕤𝕚𝕟 basically follows the book page for page, so it didn't make sense to read it anymore, and I had to postpone reading it for another time. Regardless of the fact that I haven't read the entire series, I am convinced that this is my favorite work by mxtx because I am extremely Lan Wangji biased. I love him very much. That being said, this will mark the point where what I haven't read starts. The only other titles I haven't read that I currently own are In the Dark, and you can see that the illustration on the spines are now complete with the reverse order. I also haven't read the two titles by 𝕤𝕚𝕟𝕚𝕚. Those are The Imperial Uncle and Peach Blossom Debts, and that is the end of what I haven't read. Everything else are the non-mxtx 7 Seas releases, and I have read all of those. As for what I plan to buy, I plan to buy pretty much everything that 7 Seas is releasing this year, and then maybe some from other publishers like 𝕤𝕚𝕚𝕚 and Monogatari novels. 7 Seas has a really good release list for Danmei only on their website. I'll put a link to it in the description if you'd like to use it to plan, but I'll also go over it quickly at the end of the video. For reading, my goal is to read every Danmei release I buy this year, as well as everything I currently own. But in the off chance that doesn't happen because shit happens, I think I can live with reading at least 75%. That pretty much covers what I currently own, my TBR, and my purchase plan. I'll now do a recap of my recent reads. Okay, recent reads. I read the last volume of TGCF and the fourth volume of 𝕤𝕚𝕚𝕚 at the end of 2023. I also recently read the third volume of 𝕤𝕚𝕚𝕚, and I'm filming this portion of the video the day after the first portion, so I've made more progress with the last volume of Scum Villain. So while we're on the topic, I'll just go ahead and talk about that one a little bit more. Like I mentioned, I didn't read the last book in the 24-hour reading vlog. And the reason I gave for not doing so in that vlog was that at the end of the third book, the series already felt pretty much complete, and reading the last book didn't feel as important. But I think another reason why I didn't read the last book was because the third book deviated a little bit from the plot points that held my interest in the first two books. So that played a part in that reasoning. Throw in the fact that I'd been reading for 16 hours straight at that point, and it was a lose-lose situation. In hindsight, now that I'm reading the fourth book, I wish I just powered on and read it during that vlog, but I can't go back. However, taking time in between reading the main story and the extras did come with a little bit of an advantage, mainly the fact that the extras give the characters a bit more depth, and I had more time than I did during the 24-hour readathon to really engage with the additional information the extras provided. And even though I'm stating that as an advantage, I think it's better to read all four volumes together. If anything, I can be a cautionary tale of what not to do by leaving the fourth volume for later, like I did. And the reason I say that is because if you read only the first three volumes that cover the main story without the extras, it's easy to only focus on the fact that Shen Xinchuo or Shen Yuan was just trying to save himself from his original fate in the web novel Shen Yuan Red. So a lot of his actions come across as though that was his only motivation, and it doesn't really sell the relationship between him and Luo Binghe. Another reason is that the plot mostly promotes itself as this comedic parody of transmigration tropes, and on the surface, that makes it look like it doesn't have any more depth than that. The third book, however, starts to give you some of that depth, and if you don't read the extras, the transition from the first two books to the third one can feel a bit jarring because you've been reading these comedy-centered plots and it all of a sudden wants to be sentimental, which is where the importance of reading the extras comes in. It's like a nicely tied bow to wrap up the entire series, and it gives readers something to linger on and think about. And now that I've read it, or I'm reading it, I'm almost done, I have a revised opinion of the series as a whole. Yes, it's a parody of tropes in trashy novels you can't stop reading, but there's more to it than just that, and it's just as good as mxtx's other works. I can even understand why this will be some people's favorite of all three of her works. In Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation and Heaven Official's Blessing, the bromance and deeper themes in the story are a lot more in your face, but they're very subtle in Scum Villain, and you're not going to see them if you're not looking for them, which is like an Easter egg when you find death in something you expected to be shallow. I'm sure there are a lot of things I missed while reading the first three books because I went in with that expectation that it was going to be shallow. So I plan to reread it someday with this newfound knowledge. But going back to the extras and linking it to the story having more depth, I like how the first extra kind of explored a what-if scenario with Binghe and Bingmei, the different main characters in the two storylines. So you have Binghe, the tyrannical protagonist of the Stallion novel, who had a harem and took his revenge on Shen Xinchuo. But upon realizing the existence of Bingmei, the version that Shen Yuan's transmigration created, he tried to replace him. This was a character who looked like he had everything, and yet he was unhappy because Bingmei got something he never got, which was a kind version of Shen Xinchuo who loved and cared about the character called Luo Binghe. So Scum Villain has a lot going on for it. It's fairly easy to read in comparison to the other two series, and although it presents itself as a no thoughts, head empty read on the surface, it has hidden depth, and that's why I understand why it will be a favorite for some. Another thought that occurred to me is about the author of the original novel, Airplane Flying to the Sky or something like that. When Shen Yuan confronted him about the shitty plot of the novel, he mentioned that he didn't want to write it either, but in order to pay his bills, he wrote something that appealed to the majority. So then, can you conclude that both of their deaths and dissatisfaction with the original story possibly triggered the creation of a system that worked to write the story in a way that aligned with what the author originally wanted and also ended up satisfying Shen Yuan as a reader? I don't know, it was just something I was thinking about. So that was my revised review of Scum Villain. The other two novels I read at the end of the year were the last volume of Heaven Official's Blessing and the fourth volume of Arha. I'll start with Heaven Official's Blessing. The final volume, and just like that, the English translations of TGCF are done. I am not okay, but we still have the donghua, the manhua, maybe the live action if it ever gets released to hold on to. This final book mostly dealt with the battle against White No Face, and one of my favorite parts of the book was the illustration that showed Fang Xin, Mu Xing, and Xie Lian together again, just like old times. I love that Mu Xing finally got the opportunity to be honest about his feelings. I think he was a character that was easily misunderstood, and I'll admit that there were times when he seemed a little bit shady, even to me, but beneath it all, you still knew that he never really meant any harm. The other character I want to talk about is Junwoo. Now, if you haven't read all of TGCF, this is a spoiler, and this is your warning not to listen any further. Junwoo is somewhat of a controversial character because he was reviewed to be the main villain in the series, and there is a lot of public opinion that sways toward hating him, which is natural. I, however, could not hate him. If anything, I pitied him because he had good intentions, but the fickle nature of people destroyed that. The way I see it, once most people know that they can keep getting things from you without reciprocating, that's all they're ever going to see you as, an ATM that they can take from without having to give back. And the minute that you can't do that for them anymore, they abandon you, which was exactly what happened to 𝕤𝕚𝕚 as well. They both believed that their followers or their believers believed in them because of who they were, but the actions of those people after things went downhill for the both of them showed that they believed in them because of what they could do for them. And I think the main difference between Junwoo and 𝕤𝕚𝕚 is the existence of Hwa-chang. Hwa-chang was that devoted believer who loved and believed in 𝕤𝕚𝕚 just for being who he was. And of course, 𝕤𝕚𝕚 didn't realize that for years, but at the beginning of the series, he was just existing and living with constant disappointment in himself. He had given up on himself, had no expectations whatsoever of himself, which is really fucking sad. But now, comparing him with the person he became at the end of the book, Hwa-chang played a huge role in that. His existence made 𝕤𝕚𝕚 remember the good things about himself that he had forgotten, and there were so many good things about him. They had just become overshadowed by all the terrible shit he had been through. And this is not me making an excuse for or defending Junwoo's actions. I'm just making an argument for the importance of someone loving you just for being you. And I wish we could get an alternate storyline where Mei Nyan-ching was that person, because I think he did try to be that person for Junwoo. I also mentioned that I am extremely Lan Wangji biased, which is why Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation is my favorite series by mxtx. Lan Wangji is my favorite character, but my favorite couple definitely goes to Hwa-lian. I feel so emotionally attached to the both of them. I love them as characters, and even though we didn't get a lot of Hwa-chang's backstory because most of Heaven Official's Blessing is told from 𝕤𝕚𝕚's point of view, I still think they are incredibly complex and nuanced characters. There are so many interesting characters in Danmei novels, and a goal of mine in the future would be to sit down with them, really take them apart, and analyze what makes them such compelling characters to readers, as well as the story that is being told. I love the last book very much, everything about it. The dialogue between 𝕤𝕚𝕚 and Hwa-chang after Junwoo was defeated. It was equal parts heartbreaking and beautiful in a poetic way. And then the tale that ended the main story about the scrap immortal and the red-robed ghost king. When I read the last line by the Heaven Official's Blessing, "No paths are bound," I was sobbing. And there was that mini illustration that showed the both of them together. Oh my god, I was just like, no, I don't want you guys to go. So I was so happy that I had the side stories to hold on to them a little bit longer. Overall, it was an amazing end to the series. The other book I read was 𝕤𝕚, and I've read all of 𝕤𝕚 before. This is just a reread and more of a refresher on the series. There wasn't a whole lot going on in this volume. Chu Wanin woke up and he started to set the stage for Moran coming to terms with his true feelings. And probably as a result of that, or maybe the fact that Moran is now a grown hunk of a man. Did you see that illustration on the inner leaf of the book? I digress, but probably as a result of that, it's also getting harder for Chu Wanin to completely ignore his feelings for Moran. Shu Mong is still an entertaining narcissist, and Shimei, I'm going to make an anime reference here, specifically a Naruto reference. Shimei got the 10-10 treatment in this book, which is basically the side character who gets so little screen time you hardly even remember they exist. The only reason he came up so much in previous books was because of Moran's misguided obsession with him, and once Moran understood his feelings, Shimei just faded into non-existence. A friend was actually saying something similar the other day, that every time he was mentioned in this book, it gave them like a jump scare because it almost felt like he just came out of nowhere. That's how little there is of him in this book. The book had a slice of life, relaxing vibe to it, which is a nice break from the tragic theme of the entire series. The only thing I was a little bit disappointed about was that this book didn't have a scene I was looking forward to. I guess my memory of the web novel doesn't recall this portion of the series extending for so long. And Seven Seas revealed the cover of the 5th volume recently. It looks like that volume is going to mainly focus on the wedding arc, going by the cover. So my anticipated scene is not going to be in that one either, most likely, but I'll live. This is another series with really interesting and complex characters. You have 𝕤𝕚𝕚, the young master who thirsts for love and a place to call home, which I found interesting because his uncle and aunt welcomed him into the sect with open arms, and they treat him like their own son. The only person who is blatantly rude to him in the series is 𝕤𝕚𝕚, and that isn't a treatment that is specific to 𝕤𝕚𝕚. 𝕤𝕚𝕚 is an arrogant narcissist who treats most people that way. There are things revealed in the story that shed more light on 𝕤𝕚𝕚's upbringing and explain why he is so quick to attach himself to people emotionally when they show him a little bit of kindness. And I've always just seen him as a selfless, sweet kid. Yes, he became extremely twisted and a tyrant who committed genocide and other deplorable acts, but he was acting out against a world that took away the only person he loved and who he thought genuinely showed him the affection he craved. It doesn't justify his actions, but it explains them a little bit. Then you have 𝕬𝕚𝕚, the angry kitten. And the only reason people refer to him as an angry kitten is because he is so inflexible where rules are concerned, and his discipline is extreme, but he's also kind-hearted. I also think most of his anger is usually directed towards 𝕤𝕚𝕚, and they stem from his feelings of self-worth, because why does this man think he's unattractive? He's literally the only one who sees himself that way. There were even events of people trying to sneak a peek of him while taking a bath. And regardless of how aloof and stoic he is, he was always described with words like ethereal, goodly looking, angelic beauty. But when he looks at himself, he only sees someone who would never be loved by the person he loves. And so he compares himself with the person who got the love he wanted. I think those feelings drive some of his anger towards 𝕤𝕚𝕚. They're not necessarily out of retaliation because 𝕤𝕚𝕚 doesn't love him back. It feels more like he's using it as a way to hide his own feelings. And I love this man, I really do. But as the older of the two of them and the one who is in a higher position in the sect, I think there are a lot of things he did wrong that contributed to the misunderstanding the entire series is built on. If you're just pointing fingers, again, there are things revealed later in the series that help you understand him more, and I've seen some people describe him as neurodivergent, which makes a lot of sense. He's super sensitive to things like taste and social interactions in a way that seem like he's overstimulated by them, like how he can't eat spicy food and has to have his food cooked a specific way. And there's also the way he constantly berates himself in his head because he's kind of socially awkward. He doesn't know how to express his feelings, he's rigid, and he sees the world in black and white. And that rigidity is probably part of the reason why he struggles so much with how he feels about 𝕤𝕚𝕚 and why I think he feels justified in the actions that oftentimes come across as extreme to other people. In the first 4 books and the little glimpses that readers can get into his psyche, you can see that he's a lovely person that you just want to put in your pocket and protect, but that's not what everyone else sees. He still comes across as cold and aloof most of the time. I love them so much. I love complex characters with lots of layers, and I am so excited to read this series all over again. I think Seven Seas recently confirmed that the series will have 11 books. So if this is your first time reading this, there's still quite a bit to go. And I'll say just enjoy the lack of plot in this book because you will be hit with a lot of plot soon. Now for 2023, the first Danmei release of the year is the 3rd volume of 𝕬𝕗𝕚 Autumns. I haven't done an isolated review of this series on my channel, but I've been reading it since it was released last April and featuring it in my monthly wrap-ups as I read it. I was aware of the donghua before the release of the first book. I tried watching it, couldn't really get into the 3D animation, but once I got familiar with the plot, it was fairly easy to watch it. It honestly isn't that bad, and now that I've gotten over that hurdle, I watch other 3D animation without batting an eye. Unlike Scum Villain that has the comedy thing going for it, which makes it easy to watch, this one's a little bit harder to get into because of the plot, and the animation just makes it harder. But like I said, once you're familiar with the plots, it's quite easy to watch it, and this is such a great series. For a quick summary, Thousand Autumns follows the story of a sheltered Taoist called Shen Chao, who is the leader of the most renowned Taoist sect. He was also the disciple of the top martial artist in this world, so he has a nice, cushy life. At the beginning of the series, he is challenged to a duel by the disciple of another top martial artist who had a history with his master. And to the surprise of everyone who witnessed the duel, Shen Chao gets gravely injured and he's even believed to be dead for a while. Fortunately for him, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, the leader of a demonic sect called Yan Wuxi discovers him and nurses him back to health. Now, this sounds like the setup of a lovely story about star-crossed lovers, but it's not, okay? It is not. See, Yan Wuxi, the demonic sect leader, saved Shen Chao because he believes that Shen Chao is a sheltered young master who has not been exposed to the cruelty of the world. So he wants to perform an experiment where he takes it upon himself to show Shen Chao everything that is terrible about humanity. And what he wants to test is if Shen Chao can hold on to his kindness and morality after the fact. The majority of the plot of this series is political and like religious centrism, because beneath the faction and dynasty wars in the series, there is also a battle to promote one religion over all others, and I like that the author has kept it that way. I have, however, listened to the audio drama of this series, so I know how it ends, and this is a Danmei novel. There is a romantic plot. If my face isn't already doing the talking for me, I'll say it myself. I am incredibly annoyed by the romantic plot of this series because Yan Wuxi is a terrible fucking person and he does not deserve Shen Chao. I like that the author didn't try to make him have a drastic change in personality because it's not realistic for who he is. And if the expectation is that he needs to change, then it starts to play into the idea of good and evil a little bit too much. I think it's okay for them to be themselves and be able to learn from each other while still being romantically incompatible. But that's obviously not what happened. The only good thing that came out of Shen Chao's relationship with Yan Wuxi was his development as a person, and another thing related to his cultivation and martial arts that's kind of a spoiler. But Shen Chao is an extremely kind person, and a lot of people took advantage of his kindness in the series, but he was still able to hold on to it despite the fact, which was the very thing that Yan Wuxi was trying to challenge in the first place. He was convinced that if Shen Chao was faced with the reality of how cruel people could be, there was no way he wasn't going to lose his kindness. And even though he didn't lose that part of himself, he was able to come to terms with the fact that people are not innately kind. At the beginning of the series, his kindness was reserved and he had a tendency to excuse people's bad behavior even when they were being downright mean to him. But he has learned how to let people know that being kind is not the same thing as weakness, and he can handle business if the situation calls for it. And I love that for him. So despite my minor annoyance with the series, and it is very minor because it's not part of the main plot, this is an amazing series and I highly recommend it. The story moves pretty fast and the political intrigue keeps you engaged throughout, and all 3 books have been 5 stars for me, and I just love it. The cover of the 4th volume was also reviewed recently. This series actually has my favorite covers of the 7 Seas Danmei releases. I love the color scheme of all the volumes and the art on the covers. But those are all the Danmei novels I've read recently. I'm currently reading some online. I'm slowly making my way through Mist, and Danmei Twitter has been going crazy over Wait For Me After School, so I want to read that as well. And the 2nd volume of Stars of Chaos also comes out in 2 days, I believe, so I'll probably read that sometime this month as well. To wrap up the video, I'll quickly go over a list of Danmei releases this quarter, starting with the 7 Seas Danmei release list. Okay, so this is the release calendar for Danmei titles by 7 Seas. That link will be in the description should you need it. I already talked about Thousand Autumns and Stars of Chaos. The first volume of Case File Compendium will be released in February, and in March, we'll be getting the third volume of Remnants of Filth, the fourth volume of Thousand Autumns, and the second volume of Guardian. The calendar currently shows their release schedule through August, but I would definitely be picking up the majority of these releases. Monogatari Novels is releasing the manhwa of How to Survive as a Villain, and I think the novel of The Silent Concubine. I haven't really decided if I want to buy these ones because they're a new publisher and I don't know a whole lot about them. 𝕤𝕚𝕚 also had a bunch of titles they picked up last year. I don't think any of them are being released this quarter, but I'll keep an eye out for them and see what I want to do about those. That wraps up this video. Whatever day you find yourself watching this, make it a great one, and I will see you in the next one. Happy reading!